Hey guys, welcome to the next session on Oracle Server Suite Pulse. So today we'll continue our work on BPL, and we've learned a new topic called Fault Management Framework. So yesterday we did some fault handling in this BPL process. Okay, so you know how it is. For each and every, you always define your fault handling at a scope level. So you can either the scope, which scope you want to do it is your choice. So always the whole BPL process would be inside a scope, and inside that you can have as many scopes as you want. Like there is no limit. Okay, and to each scope, depending on your business functionality, like you can define n number of faults. Okay, and there are basically two kinds of faults when we talk about faults. One is called the system fault, and the other one is called business faults. Okay, so when I talk about faults, there are two types of faults. One is business faults and the other one is called system faults. So what is a business fault? Business fault is something that arises out of your business logic. Okay, so let's say I have a department, okay, and it would have like multiple departments, and each department would have a department ID. Okay, I'm talking about departments table. So let's say I send a department ID which is not existing. Let's say there are 10 departments and I send the department ID as 11. Okay, so that's kind of a bad data, right? So that's kind of a business fault wherein I should say to the caller that that particular department does not exist. So it is a valid request, okay, but only the thing is the data is bad there. Okay, or in other words, let's say, or a simple multiplication, a by b. Okay, whenever I send b as 0, I know that whenever b is 0, you get a fault. Like anything by 0 is undefined, right? So business faults you can actually anticipate. Like let's say, depending on your business logic, you know what are valid scenarios, what are invalid scenarios. Okay, so all those invalid scenarios, you will actually define it as false in BPL, and then you will let your customer know. Okay, so those are called business faults. And when it comes to system faults, these basically occur at the system level. Let's say your JVM goes out of memory, okay, or something goes down. Okay, let's say we have seen yesterday, like the service goes down. So those things you cannot anticipate, right? Like you know that happens eventually, like some point of time, but you cannot expect it. Like suddenly, if the memory goes down, like you cannot do anything. You don't have any resources to tackle it. So such kind of things is called system faults. So Oracle Source Suite handles both business faults and system faults. In one of the examples, like downstream, like I won't do the fault example within the session, but I will show you like how different business faults are handled. Okay, and how we usually handle business faults and system faults. So the way we do it is very simple. So all these things are basically system faults. Okay, and then when it comes to business fault, you will define them as a variable and you define them as a fault. So you basically uh, select it here. Okay, so it would be in your WSDL. So whenever some service provider is providing a service, or when you are the service provider, you know what are invalid values. Let's say if I get a um, not invalid department ID, I say that the department ID is invalid as a response. So that response is called a business fault. So I would actually uh, expose them in my WSDL. So you would have to go to that WSDL and then just select the fault. Okay. So down the line, I will show you one example how we do it. And let's not dig into that right now. Okay, so today we will and yesterday, so we understood how we handle falls, and we have seen like what are the different issues that we have if we handle the falls within your code. Like we have listed 5 or 6 different issues for doing the fault handling within the code, right? So in order to tackle with these issues, Oracle has come up with a framework called fault management framework. Okay, so when you use this fault management framework, all the issues that you have seen here, like all this will go off, and you have so many extra features also. So first of all, let me explain you the architecture of fault management framework. Let's say this is your composite, and then you have multiple invoke activities within it. Okay, or let me, for simplicity's sake, let me give only one. Let's say you have an invoke activity somewhere, like your process is very big. At some point, there is an invoke activity through which you are calling a service. Okay, so let's assume this is a web service. Okay, when everything goes well, you get the response and then you continue. Fine. Okay, but let's say this web service is down. In that case, what happens? Like instead of getting the response, you would get a fault, correct? It could be a business fault or a system fault, whatever it is, but in this case you get a system fault because it is down. Okay, or if you send an invalid value, you get a business fault, whatever it is. Like in this case, what happens is, I mean, currently, like with whatever code we have done, it basically, the fault comes here and the system knows that it is a fault, so it will check in the fault handling, like it will check the branches, like it will first check if it has got any catch activities. Okay, and inside the catch activity, it will first check for the specific fault. If there is a branch for that specific fault defined, it goes inside that. Otherwise, it will basically traverse one after the other. Like you could have n number here, right? So let me define, let's assume that we have 4 different faults: remote, binding, assertion, and catch-all. Okay, let's say there is a assertion fault. So when the fault comes back, the system knows that it is a fault. So instead of going here, what happens is it basically traverses this. It checks it's not a remote, it is not assertion, it is a binding fault. Okay, so it comes here and this is how it happens, right? Now this happens when you define your fault handling within your BPEL process. Okay, with this kind of implementation, we have seen what are the various issues. Let me not go through that again, but instead, in order to tackle that issues, what Oracle has done is it has come up with a framework which basically sits in middle of your service and your composite. Okay, so this comes into picture only when there is a fault. Okay, whether it could be a business fault or a system fault, whatever it is, whenever there is a fault, this particular layer comes into the picture. Okay, so let's assume this particular layer sits in between these two. Okay, so what happens is whenever there is a fault, instead of directly going to the composite, the control or the response actually goes to this layer. Okay, now this layer will decide how to handle it. Okay, so let's say, I mean, how we implement it, we'll see that in a moment, but let us try to understand the concept. So let's say if we want to, if whenever there is a fault, whenever there is a remote fault, I want to retry it after 10 seconds. Okay, so I will define that particular logic within this layer. Okay, so this layer will take control of the fault here, and then it will wait for 10 seconds, and again it will ask the composite to invoke the service again after 10 seconds. Okay, again when you come back, like if the response is proper, it goes and it continues with the BPEL. But if the response is not good, like if you get the fault again, then it again checks for the business logic what it is. So you can define any business logic. You can define a business logic like you retry the service for 5 times within an interval of, like giving an interval of 10 seconds, like in 10 seconds, 20th second, 30th second, 40th second, 50th second. Or you can even do it like this, like you have exponential back off with every 2 seconds. So it would be like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So you can define pretty much anything. Or let's say you can even define something like this, like whenever there is a fault, you just stop the whole process at this point. Don't end it, but just stop it, and then you call for a human intervention. Okay, so when it goes to the human intervention, there would be some person, the administrative person. he goes and he checks the logs. So he would find that this service is down. So he will call this service provider or raise a ticket. And then when the service is up, he can manually re-trigger the whole service. Okay. So from here onwards, like it continues. So various things you can define within this layer. Okay. The advantage that you get with this is you are basically not touching the implementation. Okay. So implementation is something like it's very sacred, like you don't touch it because it contains a business logic, right? If something goes wrong, the whole thing messes up. So in like without touching the business logic, you're actually defining the way you want to control the faults. That is where this layer comes into the picture. Okay. So another thing that you can do with this layer is, now let's say there are two invocations. Okay. Now this guy invokes a service, this guy invokes another service. Okay. Now, whenever there is a remote fault for web service 1, I want to handle it in a particular fashion. Let's say I want to handle it like I want to retry it 5 times. Okay. But whenever there is a remote fault on second service, I want to directly go for a human intervention. Okay. So even these kinds of flexibility you have with this fault management framework, like same kind of exception coming out of different services, like you can handle them differently. So these kind of flexibility this layer provides, and this layer is called basically fault management framework. Okay. And the way fault management framework is implemented is basically using two files called fault policy and fault bindings. Okay. So now let's understand what is fault policy. Okay. So let me open another one. I'll redraw the same diagram. Let me draw it a little big this time. Okay. So let's say there is a web service 1. Okay. And there is this is your BPEL process, and this is your fault policy file. Okay. So basically it is part of your fault management framework. Okay. So I have an invoke activity, and then I invoke this service. Okay. And please remember that only whenever a fault happens, only then this guy comes into the picture. Otherwise, your response directly goes to the service. Okay. So what fault policy has? Fault policy basically has two main parts. One is called fault conditions, and the other one is called actions. Okay. So the first block is called condition, or let me just write it. Okay. So the name itself tells you that the first thing checks for the condition, like what kind of fault it is, whether it is a remote fault or a binding fault or some business fault X or some business fault Y. It basically checks it. So basically inside this, how the structure would be is, it would be something like this: condition name equal to say remote fault. Okay, ref is equal to say action 1. Okay, as simple as this. Okay, I'm just writing it. This is not per syntax, but I'm just telling you. Okay, so it would be as simple as this. Similarly, you would have another one, say under the condition name is equal to say binding fault. Okay, ref equal to say action 2. And similarly, you have n number of conditions. You can define any number of conditions, like there's literally no limit to that. Okay, so in this case I would say it as say business fault 1, or say not visible by 0 fault. This is a business fault. Okay, you can give any name for the business faults. I mean, the WSDL gives you, say, business fault 2 or assertion fault. I'm just defining some faults. Okay, so the condition file would be something like this, wherein you define the condition. Okay, so you basically check for the fault, what type of fault it is, and then you will point it to a particular action. Okay, so basically what happens is, whenever a fault happens, so the control will check what kind of fault it is. Let's assume that it is a remote fault. Then it will go to the ref attribute, it will see action 1, and then it will come to the actions block and check for action 1. Okay, so here how it would be is, say, action name is equal to, say, action 1. Okay, and then inside this you would say retry. Similarly, I would have another block, action name equal to action 2. So I would say human intervention. Similarly, action name equal to action 3. I would say I want to replay the scope, like, and then action name equal to action 4. I want to rethrow. We'll understand what are all these. Okay, maybe or even I can call a Java class, or I would say call a Java class to handle. Okay, so your actions block would be something like this, wherein it will define a name and it will tell you what to do. Okay, so how it happens is, whenever remote fault comes, it will first check. It is like, these are like if conditions. It will check where is the remote fault. Okay, this is the remote fault. What is the corresponding action? Action 1. Now it comes to the action 1. So it checks for the action 1, and what is the uh, action is retry. So basically it goes and retries the same invocation again. Okay, this is how it happens. Let's say it is a binding fault. Okay, so it comes here, binding fault is action 2. So what is action 2? Action 2 is human intervention. So the whole thing stops there itself, and then it goes on a human intervention. So some admin person has to come there and retrigger it. Okay, or similarly, you want, for a particular kind of business fault, you want to handle it in a Java class. So whenever that happens, like it comes here, it checks for a Java class. So inside the Java class, you will define your logic. Or let's say there is a before process handed over to you by some company. Okay, it has a very well defined fault handling within the before process, like the one that we have done. Okay, so you don't want to again redo yourself, like it's already there. You don't want to do it again. So you can just rethrow. When you say rethrow, what happens is it basically goes to the fault handling here. Okay, so this is how fault policy works. Like it majorly has two different sections. First one checks for what type of fault, and the second one tells you what to do. Okay, and the next file is called fault bindings file. This may be little confusing, but it is very easy to understand if you clearly observe. There is another file called fault bindings file. Okay, so what it tells you is, in the previous example, I gave you a situation, right, wherein you have two web services, web service 1 and web service 2. Okay, both throw the remote fault. Let's say both are throwing the remote fault, but you want to handle this remote fault in one way, say retrying, and you want to handle this remote fault by web service 2 in a different way. Say you want to call a Java class. Okay, so but in my condition section, if I see, like for the remote fault, I always call action 1, right? Action 1 is always retry. Okay, so how would this action for a remote fault go to Java callout? Like, okay, you got what I mean, right? So in this case, like if we have only this section, like the conditions and action, it is a set, right? These two is a set. So if in this set, like always remote fault will point to retry only. Okay, there is no other way because action 1 is hard coded. Okay, so if you want to handle in a different way, what you do is you just extend the same fault policy file to have another set of conditions and actions. Okay, so these two I basically combine and give a name called fault policy 1. It is single file, but I would give a name called fault policy 1. And similarly, what I do is I define another block and name it as fault policy 2. Okay, and even it will have conditions and actions. So inside this, what I will do is condition name is equal to remote fault, action is equal to Java callout, and here in the Java callout I'll call the Java class. Okay, so in FP2 remote fault is handled in a different way, and in FP1 remote fault is handled in a different way. Okay, so how to handle differently, we have defined it in the fault policy file. Okay, but we want to tell the system that when the remote fault is from WS1, you invoke the first set, correct? When the remote fault is from the web service 2, you invoke the second set. So where do we define? That is where fault bindings file will come into the picture. So fault bindings file is very simple. It will basically map, okay, simply it will map a reference. For now reference, there are other two also. Let me not tell you right now. I'll just put it blanks. It will map a reference to a fault policy. What do I say? To a fault policy within your fault policy XML. Okay, so your fault policy XML will have multiple fault policies. Okay, each fault policy is basically a combination of conditions and actions. Okay, so in my case, what I will do is web service 1 I will link to FP1, and web service 2 I will link to FP2. Okay, and that's all. I'm done. So whenever you get a remote fault for web service 1, it goes to FP1, which is this, and then for remote fault it is action 1, so it retries. Okay, so similarly whenever a remote fault comes from web service 2, it goes to FP2, and this is FP2, so it will handle it this way. So here I'm defining it as Java callout, so it calls a Java class. So basically fault policy.xml file defines what to do. Okay, it checks for the conditions and it does the action, whereas fault bindings file basically maps a reference. Okay, in this case it basically maps a reference to a particular fault policy condition. Okay, now what are the other two? You can even have a component or a composite. Okay, so let's say I have two BPEL processes within my composite. So this is my composite.xml. Okay, and I have two BPEL process within it. Okay, and these guys talk to different web services here. There are so many references here. Okay, let's assume. Okay, now I want to handle remote fault in BPEL 1 in a particular way, remote fault in BPEL 2 in a particular way. So where do we define? Like fault policies, you will define what is a condition and action, and I will map it here. So instead of web service 1, I would say BPEL 1 to fault policy 1. Okay, so you can map a particular fault policy at a reference level or a component level. So it could be a BPEL process or a human task or a mediator or a business group, whatever it is. Okay, or you can have a single fault policy for the whole composite also. Okay, so that is where it is. So this is the architecture of fault policy or fault management framework. Okay, let's do an example. When we do the example, you will clearly understand what it is.
Ravi Kumar here. Is this approach okay? Is it part of SOA principles, or it is something related to Oracle
No,
implementation?
Oracle has given this framework. It is not part of the standard SOA principles.
Okay, okay. It's because this fault finding file, it seems to be like in other technologies they call as manifest files, where basically it will have the mapping to different frameworks, basically.
Okay.
Like how you put the fault policy like that. So if you fault finding is something, binding is something low-level technical term, but they call sometimes as manifest files in other technologies.
Okay. So this is completely given by Oracle, and this is one of the mainly used things in any project. Okay, so let's do the example. Okay, and one other major advantage with this fault policy file is when you have these two files, fault management framework comes into picture. You just remove these two files and it goes back to your regular implementation. Okay, so even here we'll do the same way. So this is my BPEL process. Okay, now I am trying to retry and then human intervention, and then I will do some human intervention. But yesterday we created a synchronous process, right? Synchronous process, like in my current implementation or in my current server, the timeout is 30 seconds. Okay, so when it is beyond 30 seconds, it is automatically faulted because it is timing out. Okay, so within 30 seconds, I cannot show you the human intervention, everything, right? So I just created a asynchronous process with the same implementation. I'll share you this code. So basically it's exactly same. When you see here, it is exactly the same. Only thing is I made it asynchronous so that I'll have time to explain everything to you. If it is synchronous, like within that 30 seconds, I have to show you everything, which is obviously not possible. Okay. And when you're talking about human intervention, it takes time, right? So when the person comes, it depends. Like if he's not in the shift, like it might take even 8 hours for him to come and then check it. If it is a synchronous process, it times out by that time, right? So whenever a human is involved, you usually model it as an asynchronous process. Okay. So the same process, if you want to redo it as a asynchronous process, then you do it just for practice. Otherwise, I'll share you the code. You can just import it. Okay. It is exactly the same process. Okay. Let me open this. First of all, what we will do is we will execute the, so here it is. So for the full name service, we have defined a remote fault and a catch-all. Okay. So let's first of all, let us run it. Employee async. For this Viswell, I've created a SOAP UI project. You know how to create a SOAP UI, right? So, okay, so this is the one. And then let me open the instances for the moment. Okay, so 916 is the last one. Okay, so let me invoke it. Now remember, this is asynchronous, so you don't get the response. If it is synchronous, like we got the response yesterday, right? But it is asynchronous, so we don't see anything here. But if you refresh, you will see here it is 10 o'clock. So let me open it. Okay, and when I go inside, I will see that my full name service is down. Okay, fine. So when it is down, what happened? It went to the catch remote fault block. Okay, and then we did an alternate logic. So we finally got the response, something like this. Okay, fine. Now instead of now what I want to do is whenever this guy goes down, I want to retry 4 times because the service provider of the full name service has told me that this is like a highly available service. Whenever it goes down, we just do a retry. Okay. And even if it doesn't work for 2 or 3 times, maybe then you stop your process and call me. Okay. So, I mean, you'll have the SLA agreements, right? Service level agreements wherein you'll know whether it is highly available or not. So now I know that if it is just down, I just don't want to go to the alternate logic because let's say this is a very complicated service and I want the response at any cost. So in that case, like what I want to do is I want to retry it. So let's see how we do it. Okay. So in regular process, if you want to retry, then inside your remote fault, you want to create another invoke activity and invoke it, right? But let's say I want to retry it 4 times every 5 seconds. So how I do it? It's very simple. As I told you, there will be two files, right? So we'll define the first file. Go to here and say fault. Just say fault, and you get a file called fault policy file. Okay. So let us look at the structure first. Okay, the first tag is fault policy tag. Okay, this is what I was telling you here. Where is it? I told you, right? You define an ID. So this is fault policy 1, fault policy 2. So this is basically this one. It might be little confusing because the file name is fault policies and then the tag name is fault policy. Okay, so here you can have any number of blocks. Like I can have another block like this. Okay, just to map it to my example that I've given earlier, this serves for web service 1. Okay, similarly I would say this serves for web service 2, policy 2. Okay, so in my example what I was telling you, like whenever there is a remote fault, okay, so fault name, what is a fault name? Okay, whenever there is a remote fault, what I want to do, I want to retry. Okay, how many times you want to retry? Where is retry? Here. Either you can double click on this, okay, or you can directly go to the source, whatever you feel comfortable. I always feel comfortable going to the source, but since that we are new to the project right now, let's do it here. So I double click on this. Okay, so how many times you want to retry? Let's say I want to retry 4 times. Okay, every 2 seconds. And okay, I don't want to do it every 2 seconds like this, like 2, 4, 6, 8. Instead, I want to try it like 2, 4, 8, 16, like in an exponential way. Okay, so that I give enough room for the service to come up. So that is what this one says, exponential backoff. If you want to have it in powers, let's say it is 3, then what happens is 3, 9, 27, 81, it goes that way. Okay, so it's basically square. So I would give it 2 4 times, so it would go for 2, 4, 8 and 16. So I want exponential backoff. Okay, so even after 4 attempts, if it fails, what you want to do? Okay, in my case, even after 4 attempts, if it fails, like let's not abort the process. Instead, we'll stop the process and then we will make the service up and running and then restart the process from wherever it stopped. Okay, so that is where retry failure action comes into picture. Like when even after 4 attempts, if it fails, what you want to do? I want to go for a human intervention. Okay, and let me say okay. If you see here, so let's see what is defined. Okay, fault policy condition. What is a fault name? Fault name. Where is remote fault? One second. Okay, it came in fault policy too. Okay. Oh, okay, okay. So here by default it selected the second one. Okay. So we have two policies, right? First one we didn't define anything. In policy 2, like when there is a remote fault, we did a retry, and then retry we know what are the properties. So let me see here. Okay. So this is fault policy 2. Okay. So what is the condition? Whenever the fault name is remote fault, you reference a default retry. Okay. So what happens? Like basically I said, whenever it is a remote fault, you reference action 1 and you have to check that action 1 in the conditions, right? Similarly here, we'll check this. It could be literally any name, okay? ASDF, and then here I give ASDF, okay? It need not be the same name, but just to understand it in a clear way, they give you uh, good names, like the readable names, okay? So in the condition, I will take this and check in the actions. So action, no, this is termination, so you will go like you can do all these, you'll go to the default retry. Okay, So in retry, what it says is you retry for 4 times with an interval of 2 seconds, which increases exponentially, and even after everything it fails, go to human, default human. Okay, now what is this default human? Again, it checks in the actions. Where is default human? This one? No. Okay, this one. So when it is default human, what happens? Like I can have it as human also. Okay, it doesn't matter. In default human, the tag is human intervention. This is a predefined tag by which it says, just like if I say retry, it retries, right? Similarly, if I say human intervention, it waits for the human intervention. Okay, so this is my logic. So my fault policy 2, so fault policy 1 is kind of dummy for now. Like policy 2 tells you when there is a remote fault, you retry, and after that go for human intervention. If it fails, if it succeeds, it continues. Okay. So policies file I have defined. Unfortunately, Oracle Server Suite or 12c doesn't give you a wizard to create the fault bindings file. Okay. Actually, 11g doesn't even give you wizard for fault policies. Both you need to copy from some source. So I already have the bindings file. I'll share it with you. Okay. So this is the binding file. Just place it at this level. Okay. So let me copy path. Okay, here is my fault policies file. So you just copy your fault bindings file here, and we will edit it, don't worry. Okay, so let me refresh this. Okay, so I have the fault bindings file. Let me look at the bindings. So bindings file, what I told you, it is basically a mapping, right? So in my case, let us map the whole composite just to make it simple. Okay, so in my whole composite, whenever there is a remote fault or whenever there is a fault, like I want to handle it as per my logic. Okay, so when for the whole composite, so here you can either have a composite, or let me show you a full-fledged fault policy file, you will understand. 1 second. I'm just trying to show you a full-fledged bindings file. It's in my email. Let me download it for a moment. Okay, so this is a full-fledged bindings file. Okay, so in my previous example, I told you, right, for web service 1, I want to do it in a different type, and for web service 2, I want to do it in a different type, right? So this is how, in that case, like I will have to do something like this. So I would say fault policy 3 and say fault policy 4. Okay, so this is say web service 1 and web service 2 and its port. Okay, you can even filter at the port level. Okay, so whenever there is an issue, there is a fault from web service 1, you take the conditions from fault policy 3. Whenever it is from web service 2, take the conditions from fault policy 4. Okay, so it goes to its specific block, and then that is how it fix the right fault policy within your fault policies file. Okay, so in my case, I want to make it simple, so we'll just have the composite tag. Similarly, you have it for components also, like your BPEL process or your mediator, whatever it is. Okay, so in my case, what I'm doing is at the composite level, I'm defining the fault policy. Okay, but what is the fault policy that we have defined? Policy 2, right? Policy 1 is dummy. Okay, policy 2. So let me put it policy 2 here. I just created 2 policies just for showing you. Since we are not using this, like I can delete it also, no problem. Okay. So what happens whenever a fault comes, first the control comes into the bindings file, okay, and it picks the appropriate policy tag, and then here it comes here and it will pick the appropriate fault policy with that name, okay. So inside this you will have anyways conditions and actions. Okay, so I've defined everything. So these are the only two files I've done. I did not mention these file names anywhere, right? But I'm just deploying it. Okay, so you need not do any change, just have these two files and automatically things will happen. Like the system knows that if the fault policy files are there, you first give preference to it. What happened? Oh, it already exists. Okay. Oh, I did not change the revision number, right? Let me change it to 1.1. Okay, so you remember earlier what happened, right? Like when there was a fault, it went into the catch block, correct? So now with the introduction, I did not change the code. I did not even touch it. Okay, I just placed those two files. So let's see how it goes. Okay, it is deployed. So since it is a default revision, the URL doesn't change. I'm doing the same thing. Okay, and then go to 1.1 flow instances. Okay, so what's happening? Okay, see, it first failed in full name service, then after 2 seconds it happened, it invoked again full name service. After 4 seconds, see, it is 16.4, it is 16.2, it is 16.8. Okay, so 2, 4, now if I refresh, it would have happened again. See, after 8 seconds, it should be 16 or 17, like it's in the margin. After that, plus 16 is 33. Okay, so all the 4 attempts are done. Okay, so this is why I want it to be asynchronous, so that I can show you everything. Okay, so now you understood, right? So if I open this, you can see what happens. Like at this point it stopped, and then fault management framework took the control. Okay, and you know what happened. So after, when it failed for the first time, okay, it retried, and then again it retried, again it retried. Like it retried for 4 times, like giving a gap of 2, 4, 8 and 16, because we did it exponentially. Even after 4th time, if it fails, what did we say? Like even after 4th time it fails, go to the human intervention, right? So here you find a link called recovery required. Okay, when you click on this, it will give you options. It will give you various options, like do you want to retry, do you want to continue, do you want to rethrow. Rethrow means go back to the exception handling that is there within the code, or do you want to replay the whole scope. Okay, when I say retry, like does it do anything? It again tries, but again, see, so 4 times is done. Now it started at 18.7, 18.10, it should be 9 or 10, that's okay. After 4 seconds, now after 8 seconds, again after 16 seconds, so it is again retrying. So it is again retrying 4 times. So after that, again you get a link here, see, recovery required. Right now it is auto trying, but in a moment you get it again not recovered. Why is it not recovered? 1 second. Okay, so it is again, it did not refresh properly, but it is again recovery required. Okay, So again, you will have all the options, like you can retry or you can abort, you can replay, okay. But ideally what happens is, in real life scenarios, so whenever there is an issue, okay, what happens is whenever there is a fault, you basically send an email, the process automatically sends an email to the system admins, okay, and it goes to the recovery mode, okay. So now what happens is, when the system admin sees that, okay, they will know, like you can know from the error, right, what happened. Like even here you can know what happened. It happened because DB read service is down, correct? So as a system admin, he will check why the DB read service is down. Okay, he will see, oh, it is shut down. Okay, let me start up. I started it. So I'll go back to my uh, instance. Okay, and then I will restart from the point it stopped. Okay, so now when I say retry, what happens? It again tries to retry. Then now that the service is up, it goes through. Okay, so if I refresh it, see, it says completed. Okay, see how simple it is. Like, we have retried at this point, right? But we have actually made the service up and then retried. It went through and things went normal. Okay, see, things went normal, and finally you would have the whole response. So this is how fault management works. Okay, let me show you another one. So let me again stop it. Okay, same thing, I want to do it. Okay, now it would try for 4 times and finally it will come to recovery mode. So let me wait here on. Okay, it went to the recovery mode 3 attempts. After 16 seconds, it will do the 4th attempt. Okay, so after 16 seconds, it came into the recovery mode. Okay, so now there are two options. One thing is, you can make the service up and redo it, or you already know that there is an alternative logic, right? If you want this alternate logic to happen, okay, instead of retrying, what you do is you click on, you do a rethrow. Okay, when you say rethrow, what happens is, I told you, right, entire control comes into the fault management framework. So when I say rethrow, the entire control goes into the catch block. Okay, otherwise this will take care of all the fault handling. Only when you say rethrow, it goes back to the fault handling. So when I say rethrow here, what happens is, it goes to the alternate logic. So it was stuck here, it tried 4 times and it is stuck. And then it went to the human intervention. I said rethrow. So ideally it has to go into this one and then continue. So let's see whether it happened or not. So it failed for 4 times and then I said rethrow. Okay, there you go. So it went to the assign remote fault. Okay, and assign remote fault is this one. Okay, so you have all the control, like you can, if you feel that your fault handling within your code is good enough, like you can even rethrow, or you can do whatever you want. So you have various options. So let us explore what are the different options you have in fault policies. Basically, the standard ones are, if you want to terminate the process, you can terminate. You can use this to terminate, or you can use this to default human to do a human interaction, or you can even call a Java class. Okay, let's say it is so complicated that you want to handle it in the Java class. Okay, so you can do it, or if you want to replay the whole scope, or if you want to rethrow it to the inline exception handling, or you can just retry it. So these are the various options you have. Okay, and other than this, 12c has given file option wherein you can write to a file. I never tried this, maybe you can explore it. Okay, these are the new things, like not many people use it. So these are the standard ones. Okay, these have come from 11g onwards. So these are the different things that human fault policy file gives you. Okay, so now let me remove these two files and see what happens. Okay, so other than removing, I didn't do anything, so let me redeploy it. Or let me redeploy it in 1.2. Okay, deployment is finished. So let me invoke it. It goes to 1.2. See, it took the inline fault handling, like it went to the catch remote fault. Okay, so by this you would have understood that just by having those two files in your code, fault management framework comes into picture. Like the moment you remove that, like it goes off. Okay, so that is such a decoupled one. Like you need not even touch your code, but still it works. Okay, so that is the advantage of having your fault management framework. It works completely in isolation to your implementation. So that's about fault management. Any questions? Fault management is one topic which is concentrated during the interviews. Okay, so you better prepare it. And whatever we have seen, that's all. Like there is nothing literally. Even in DB adapters, like there are so many options to explore. But for fault policies, like it's a very small topic, but very useful topic. Okay, I'll share you this async code, but better you do it yourself. If not, you can do. Like how you create a async process, it's very simple. When you drag and drop a Beeple process, okay, here instead of synchronous, you select asynchronous, that's all, and then you define your input output, that's all. Okay, and you know why we have defined async, right? Because like human intervention, it took like 2-3 minutes to do everything. By that time, if it is synchronous, you could have faulted. And if you wait for a moment, I will show you a real-time project. Okay, so now that you are pretty much familiar with Beeple and most of the different things, okay, let me show you a project. I will stop sharing for a while and then I'll show you.